Welcome to Formation Fridays at Ascension and St. Agnes. This is the third part of a three-part series on the Book of Ruth from the Old Testament. We're using an oil painting by Thomas Rook called The Story of Ruth, which was painted in 1866-67 and is now hanging in the Tate Museum. It's a lens to examine our story. In the first week, we looked at the first panel of the painting and talked about how the story ends with the birth of Obed, who was the ancestor of King David and Jesus Christ. Then last week, looking at the second panel of the painting, we talked about Boaz and Ruth's relationship and how the story conveys the importance of protection and support for the vulnerable and the helpless. This week brings us to the third panel, where we see Ruth and Naomi pictured on the road back to Bethlehem from the land of Moab. If you recall, Naomi had moved to Moab from Bethlehem in Judah because of a famine with her husband and two sons. By this point in the story, her husband had died and her sons had married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, and then her sons had died. So Naomi is left with two daughters-in-law. She decides to go back to Bethlehem because she hears that God is providing his people with food. As she starts on her journey, she encourages her daughters-in-law to return to their mother's houses and look for new husbands among their own people. When they protest, she tries even harder to discourage them. She has no sons for them to marry, and even if she got remarried herself and gave birth to sons, it wouldn't make sense for them to wait until the sons grew up to get married. There are a couple reasons why Naomi may be discouraging these two young women so much. The first is the most obvious. In that culture, an unmarried woman has no protection, and there's no real hope for them to remarry when they're with Naomi. If they go home, they can find new husbands. The second is more subtle. Remember that the Israelites and the Moabites were enemies. Naomi is going home to Judah. It's hard enough for her to go back empty-handed, but even harder with two social outcasts in tow. It makes sense for her to be concerned about how the Moabite women would be treated back in Bethlehem, and perhaps even how she would be treated with Moabite family members. Orpah hears what Naomi is saying and decides to leave. You can see her in the painting in the background, looking back over her shoulder at Ruth and Naomi. She is definitely making the more sensible decision. But is there hesitancy in her backward glance? Ruth, on the other hand, insists on accompanying Naomi. In Ruth chapter 1, verses 15 to 17, she promises never to leave Naomi in a beautiful passage that is often quoted. She says, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." This passage is often read at weddings because what Ruth is promising is in effect what happens in a marriage. She is leaving her family and her people and promising to stay with Naomi, to travel with her, to live with her, to become part of her people, and to accept her God as her own. Ruth is undertaking tremendous risk here, but she does so out of a devotion to and love for Naomi. Ruth is sometimes considered a second Abraham because of what she does here. Remember that God called Abraham to leave his homeland and to travel to an unknown place, the land of Canaan, where God would make him into a great nation. Abraham obeys, even though he has no guarantee that this will happen. In the same way, Ruth leaves her people and travels to the land of Canaan, now known as the land of Judah, in order to follow the God of the Israelites with Naomi. She also is blessed by becoming part of the people of Israel and bearing the child Obed, who will become the ancestor of King David and ultimately Jesus Christ. So this part of the story of Ruth has both a surface meaning and a deeper meaning. On the surface, it's a beautiful example for us of committed love. Ruth's actions are in Naomi's best interests, not her own, but she does them anyways. On a deeper level, Ruth's actions show her faith in Naomi's God, the God of the Israelites. She will leave behind her own gods to follow this God who is new to her. Like Abraham, she is a wanderer, a foreigner without rights or expectations. And God blesses her abundantly and accepts her into his chosen people and makes her the ancestor of his beloved King David and of his son and his Messiah, Jesus Christ. This foreshadows God's acceptance of all of us Gentiles into his family and his chosen people. There is so much more to learn from this short book, but that's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed this Formation Friday series.